As indie game development continues to catapult to the forefront of mainstream gaming, it's no wonder that these underdog titles are finding their way into the public eye in big ways. Contrast, the first release from indie studio Compulsion Games, not only made its debut on Steam, but also is the first free game to be distributed on PlayStation Plus for the launch of the PS4. Set in what appears to be Paris, France during the early 20th century, Contrast is the story of a young girl named Dee Dee and her quest to reunite her estranged parents against the backdrop of dimly lit cabarets, seedy carnivals, and organized crime. Of course, it wouldn't feel like an indie game without a clever twist on established gameplay mechanics, so, in contrast, players control Dawn, Dee Dee's imaginary and strangely sexualized friend who has the ability to enter the shadow world to solve puzzles. Does Contrast have what it takes to shine with the other indie games that are paving the way for a new generation of gaming? I can tell you one thing, the game is definitely charming, but charm can only take you so far. With so much of this industry dominated by AAA multi-million-dollar releases, the indie scene is the wild card, constantly introducing variety and innovation in an otherwise consistent market. Compulsion Games certainly had the right idea with their approach to their first game. Contrast feeds off the popularity of mind-bending puzzle platformers like Portal or Quantum Conundrum while introducing a new, though not completely original, mechanic. The title becomes double entendre thanks to its characters whose moral shortcomings and seedy underworld dealings contrast beautifully against the childish innocence of the main character, Dee Dee. As I mentioned before, players control Dawn, the imaginary friend of Dee Dee, as she sneaks out to find her mother, a seductive dancer at a local jazz club, and reunite her with her misguided but well-intentioned husband. It's an odd setup and filled with lighthearted anecdotes despite some rather serious subject matter, especially when looked at from the perspective of a confused child. The game features a soundtrack that will satisfy fans of smooth jazz or anyone, myself included, who has a music-induced soft spot for games like L.A. Noire and The Saboteur. To top it all off, Compulsion was quite creative in their use of light and shadows to create some perplexing but satisfying puzzles. Truth be told, though, Contrast is a game that speaks to me through its music and visual flair, but a well-established atmosphere is not always enough to ensure success, especially as these new and oftentimes inexperienced developers attempt to leave their mark in an increasingly crowded indie space. Gameplay in Contrast hinges upon the use of Dawn's shadow-shifting ability to solve environmental puzzles, usually in the interest of reaching an otherwise inaccessible area. With the push of a button, Dawn can become a shadow on a wall and then scale shadows created by objects in the environment to reach new areas or hard-to-reach items. These puzzles sometimes require the player to reposition objects in the environment to create new shadows that can then be used to solve the puzzle and progress. It's a novel concept that unfortunately starts to fall apart as soon as players take control of Dawn and set out to start solving puzzles. From the very first moments of the game, it is obvious that Dawn is a sensitive and imprecise character to control. Her ability to move elegantly throughout the world is pretty much non-existent thanks to a rather jarring and embellished jumping animation. Being accurate with jumps is a chore, and it is guaranteed that you will miss important jumps frequently and be forced to circle back around to the beginning of the puzzle to start over. Success or failure is also determined by the player's ability to predict how Dawn's shadow will interact with some pretty awkwardly shaped shadows throughout the environment, that are usually moving. A dash ability somehow allows her to pass through thin shadow obstacles, but more often than not, it results in Dawn shifting out of the shadows completely and forcing the player to restart, for no apparent reason. This is especially frustrating considering failure was rarely a result of me not knowing how to solve the puzzle, but instead of the game's mechanics not working as intended. Players are also given the choice of hunting down shiny collectibles throughout the world, which I recommend if you want to make the game a little bit longer because it is rather short. Many times, these are only accessible by activating an interactive cutscene that plays out in the form of shadows exchanging dialogue on a wall. This gives you a few moments to shift into the wall, scale the shadows, before the dialogue ends and the shadows disappear. Once again, novel idea, but one that quickly becomes frustrating as you find yourself falling victim to the game's shortcomings and having to start over several times, as the same dialogue plays over and over again. The game's set-piece puzzle rooms, including a charming puppet show, a pirate ship carnival attraction, and a bizarre lighthouse, are easily the highlight of the experience, but are unfortunately too few and far between to overshadow the game's biggest problem. I'm just going to come out and say it. Contrast is not a game that feels like it was ready to be released. This game is plagued with jank. The number of times Dawn became stuck in an animation or shadow is hard to swallow. For instance, every single time Dawn set down a box that was being carried, she suddenly entered into what appeared to be a falling animation and remained there for 3 or 4 seconds. Every single time. An incredibly annoying rolling cart sound effect got stuck on a loop, on more than one occasion throughout the game, sometimes continuing to play well beyond leaving the area in which the cart actually existed. The damn sound sometimes followed me all the way until the next loading screen, which on one occasion lasted 10+ minutes. To top it all off, the game's core shadow mechanic feels unpredictable, imprecise, and janky, making even the most sound of puzzles, of which there are only few, a chore to complete. I commend Compulsion games for giving life to these characters and to this concept, but I can't ignore the fact that Contrast needed some more time in the oven. In the end, Contrast is a game whose potential far outweighs its structural integrity. It is jam-packed with charm, and for some that will be enough to carry them through the experience. For others, it will be a frustrating romp through a deceptively alluring world riddled with bugs, imprecision, and missed potential. And watch out for that rolling cart, because damn.
But I tried not to dream about you. You say you're sorry, but you're never really sorry. Wish I could